That's me about a month into my teaching career, 1995. Can you pick me out? There I am, right in the middle with the Sally Jesse Raphael glasses. By the way, if you don't know who that is, that should tell you it's been a while. I was fresh out of college, teaching English as a Peace Corps volunteer in southern Albania. I was just a few years older than my students, so I grew that uncomfortable red beard because I felt like it gave me an air of authority in the classroom. And I would never have admitted this to you at the time, but on the inside, I was terrified that somebody was going to detect that I wasn't a real teacher. And so I threw myself into trying to figure out what would a real teacher need to know. This is what I came up with. I thought I needed to know the English language from top to bottom, inside and out. I needed to be able to answer every grammar question, book talk every novel, and provide the best possible word choice at a moment's notice. And I thought that was pretty much it. It didn't take me long to start realizing that those students needed a lot more from me than that. They needed to learn about relationships. They needed help with things like perseverance, courage, honesty, and kindness. They really needed help with that one. And I mean, all of us do to some extent. But when you're a young person, the world is a really difficult place to navigate. You need all the help you can get. And you really need all the kindness you can get too. And I started to realize that those skills, and I think they're essential life skills, perseverance and courage, honesty, kindness, that those skills would take them just as far in life, if not even farther, than the reading and writing skills that I've been trained to equip them with. And I also started to realize that it was going to be my responsibility to figure out a way to teach them those things. Now, don't get me wrong, in all the schools that I've worked at in my 20-plus years in the classroom, we've had some kind of lessons designed to teach the students character. But just about every time I would tell my students it was time for the character lesson, I'd hear, "Oh, not again." We do role plays, and they couldn't take it seriously. I'd see students' eyes glazing over, or people looking at the clock. But most importantly, I couldn't really see any change in their character as a result of the character lessons. That seemed kind of important. So I started to think about what could be some ways that I could help them to learn character in a way that could be beneficial to them. So right around that time, I stumbled across a study that was done by researchers at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in their Center for Investigating Healthy Minds. And these researchers set out to answer the question, can compassion be learned? So here's how they did their study. First, they showed participants in the study images of people in distress, crying children, burn victims, things like that. And they took an MRI of their brains while they viewed those images. Then after that, they had them engage in an ancient Buddhist technique called compassion meditation. And the way that worked is they had to visualize a person they knew in a moment of suffering. First, they did that with people that it was easy for them to feel compassion for, with friends and loved ones. Then they practiced it on themselves. And last of all, they practiced that on people that it was more difficult for them to feel compassion for, people they'd come into conflict with. And they visualized that person in a moment of suffering, and then they repeated phrases like, "May you be free from suffering. May you have joy and ease." And they practiced this over and over and over and over. And then at the end of the study, the researchers showed them the images of crying children again, and they took a second MRI of their brain. Only this time they noticed there was increased activity in the region of the brain known as the inferior parietal cortex. That's the part of the brain that's associated with empathy and understanding of others. And what they determined from all this was that compassion is not fixed. It can be learned. And the key to the learning is in the practice. The lead author of the study, Dr. Helen Wang, related it to weightlifting. She said that with repeated practice, you can build up your compassion muscle. So I started thinking about what this study meant for those students and those character lessons and my own practice. And I started to think about maybe the reason that these character lessons we're doing in my classroom aren't leading to change is because the things we're doing aren't really practice. And the reason they're not practice is because the students don't find them authentic. It's not real to them. And so I sat down with a yellow legal pad and I started to brainstorm. What could be some ways that we could have regular opportunities to practice compassion in my classroom that might feel more authentic to them, and that maybe would lead to the change that we were looking for. So this is all happening in the first quarter of this school year. And then the shooting happened at Butler High School. And 2 young men, just a couple years older than my own students, were lost to their family and friends. And the need for compassion, the need for us to be able to empathize with those beyond our immediate circle, took on a completely new sense of urgency. That shooting happened on a Monday at the end of October. That same week on Friday, I introduced an activity called Undercover Agents of Kindness. Agents of Kindness was intended to be an opportunity for my students to practice compassion toward each other in a way that might feel more authentic to them, that would hopefully lead to the kind of change that we were after. So this is how it worked. I took the roster for each of my classes and cut the names into strips. Then I put those names in a bowl, and I had students draw out a random classmate's name. They had 2 weeks to perform an act of kindness for that person. After that, they had to complete a mission report where they basically detailed what they had done for that person and then reflected a little bit on how it had made them feel and how it made the other person feel. I didn't tell them this, but the mission report was also so I could be a little more sure that they really did the assignment. Got to think like a 7th grader. So when I told my students about this assignment, some of them were excited about it, some of them not so much. Some of them actually groaned when they saw whose name they had drawn, which told me that they probably needed the compassion weightlifting more than anyone. I was surprised to hear that in some cases, they didn't even know who the other person was, even though they'd been in my class together for months, and in most cases have been going to the same school for years. So a few days after I gave my students this assignment, I began to see encouraging sticky notes on lockers in the hallway. Batches of homemade cupcakes and bags of leftover Halloween candy made their way onto desks in my classroom. You could tell they're homemade, right? I saw origami, inspirational quotes, hand-drawn portraits, all kinds of things. Some of the most heartwarming examples I read about as I began to get these mission reports were a child who recognized that the person whose name he had drawn was struggling with intense frustration on a daily basis. He would get so mad sometimes he would throw his binder and pencils on the floor. And so the other student brought him a stress ball to help him deal with that frustration. Or the child who had never even spoken with the person whose name she drew, but she knew that child had sustained a concussion at soccer practice, and so she couldn't go outside for recess. And so the other student brought her some ice cream and sat inside with her during that time so she didn't have to be alone. There was a child who made some chocolate chip cookies and brought them to school. Had no way of knowing that the person that they brought them for would get into a fight at school that day and would be sitting in a chair outside the assistant principal's office when they got those cookies, at a moment when they probably needed some kindness more than any other time that week. For some of my students, this assignment was really difficult. Imagine being on the spectrum with Asperger's or autism, and you have to walk up to someone you've never even spoken with and initiate an awkward social encounter. Or having to do something kind for someone who hasn't always been kind to you. Think back to when you were 12 years old, how hard it was to approach someone of the opposite gender. So I tried to put myself in these students' shoes and make the assignment as accessible for them as possible, offering to deliver anonymous notes or gifts for people who wanted to keep their name out of it, looking up schedules and locker numbers to help facilitate a connection when I needed to. And for the most part, my students rose to the challenge. Even the ones who found this assignment really scary managed to find the will to get it done. Like my student Max, who happened to draw a female classmate's name, and he was feeling pretty nervous about that. Here's what he said on his mission report. My act of kindness was to give a Christmas card to the person that I got. I chose this because I think it is the right time. I also like the idea because even in a dark situation, it can bring someone's day to a shiny light. I had to gather gallons of braveness out of my heart. Now, when asked whether he'd be likely to repeat this act of kindness, Max said, probably not, because I wouldn't want to do this again, because doing this has made me a better person, but wearing me out a lot. I asked my students for feedback on Agents of Kindness, and it was really interesting to hear the things they had to say. Almost all of them said that it was uncomfortable to approach someone they didn't know very well and do something nice for them. But almost every time they added that they were really proud of themselves for doing it anyway, and that they felt the power in brightening someone else's day. So I decided to make it a regular assignment and do a new name draw each month. When we were finished with the first round of Agents of Kindness, I wrote a blog post about what we were doing, which was then republished by Education Week, and the story got a little local media attention after that, even a spot on an NPR radio program called The Takeaway. And the reason I mention all that to you is to say that as this story began to travel a little bit, I started to get emails from teachers from all over the country, and then from different parts of the world, like the UK, Australia, Colombia, even Micronesia. And these teachers were telling me they were excited about trying this with their classes because they'd been looking for ways to try to help their students be kinder to each other. Here in Charlotte, somebody who works at UNCC had the entire undergraduate admissions department do a name draw for Agents of Kindness. And the feedback she got from them after they did that, some of them said they'd been inspired to do additional acts of kindness for complete strangers in public that they probably wouldn't have done otherwise. For example, one of them buying a hot cup of coffee for the gentleman who was ringing the bell for the Salvation Army outside Harris Teeter in December. I had the opportunity to speak with a researcher for Barack Obama's Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy. And Dr. Murthy is writing a book on the epidemic of loneliness and how our mental health impacts our lifespans, and wanted to learn more about what we were doing. And this ripple that started with such a simple activity in room 847 at Waddell continues to spread in ways that I'll probably never even know about. So it's been great to see the things that my students have done for each other, the new relationships that have been formed, the enthusiastic response that's come from so many different directions. But did I succeed in my original goal of helping my students to become more compassionate? I'm really not sure. I have all these great tools in my classroom, marvels of modern technology. I have a Chromebook cart, a beautiful Promethean board. I don't have an MRI machine to measure their brain activity. And despite what you may have heard, a teacher's impact is not always measurable, nor is it always immediate. I did survey my students to see if they felt this activity had made a difference. And one of the questions I asked them was, have you found yourself being kinder to your family since we started Agents of Kindness? These were some of their responses. I have pushed down my anger towards my mom when she comes to wake me up. I feel that it is working and I am going to keep trying. I have gained the slightest bit more respect for my sister. Hey, these are middle school kids. That's a big one. I don't know, it kind of just stayed the same, but I didn't want to put no. No. I've become more patient, and I've also been able to listen to criticism without getting angry. Yeah? So, I don't know, I guess I would say it seems to be working for some of them. And I think that's enough for me. I want to be sure you understand that I'm not here to sell you on Agents of Kindness. I'm not even sure I'm sold on it. In fact, about the only thing I am sure of is that my students need me to be more than my curriculum. And sometimes that means being willing to try to figure out what their needs are and then coming up with new ways of meeting those needs, even when I'm not sure if it's going to work. My students need me to be more than my curriculum, and I'm willing to bet that yours do too. Thank you.